Have you ever felt like you're surrounded by people, yet completely alone? Like you're speaking a language no one else understands? That deep ache in your chest when you realize that even your closest friends don't really see you, not the real you anyway. You're not broken. You're not too much. You're not even that different from everyone else. But according to Carl Jung, you might be experiencing something far more profound than simple loneliness. You might be experiencing the sacred isolation that comes with becoming whole. Jung spent his entire life studying the human psyche, and what he discovered about loneliness will change how you see your own isolation forever. This isn't about being antisocial or having poor social skills. This is about the fundamental disconnect between who you really are and who the world expects you to be. And that disconnect, Jung believed, is not just normal. It's necessary for your psychological evolution. Let me ask you something. When was the last time you felt truly understood? Not just heard, but understood. When someone looked at you and saw not just your words, but your soul. If you're struggling to remember, you're not alone. Jung discovered that the deeper you go into your own psyche, the more isolated you become from the collective. But here's what most people don't realize, that isolation isn't punishment. It's preparation. Picture this. You're at a party, surrounded by laughter and conversation. Everyone seems to be having a great time, but you feel like you're watching it all from behind glass. You can see the interactions, you can participate, but something feels fundamentally off. It's like everyone else received a manual for how to be human, and you're just improvising. That feeling, that's what Jung called the loneliness of individuation. Jung believed that most people live their entire lives wearing masks. He called these masks the persona, the carefully crafted image we present to the world to gain acceptance and approval. But what happens when you start to remove those masks? What happens when you begin to see yourself clearly, shadow and all? You realize that the person you've been pretending to be isn't actually you. And suddenly, all those connections you thought you had feel hollow, because they were built on a foundation of pretense. This is the paradox of self-awareness. The more you know yourself, the more you realize how little others know you. And it's not their fault. How can they know you when you're only just beginning to know yourself? But that realization can be crushing. It's like waking up in a world where everyone is sleepwalking, and you're the only one who remembers what it feels like to dream. You know that feeling, right? When you try to share something deeply meaningful to you, and you watch their eyes glaze over. When you express an emotion that feels earth-shattering, and they respond with a platitude. When you speak your truth, and they hear it as just another opinion. It's not that they don't care, they're just operating from a different level of consciousness. They're living in the shallows, and you've dove deep. Jung described this as the difference between the collective unconscious and individual consciousness. The collective unconscious is where most people live. It's the shared reservoir of experiences, symbols, and instincts that unite humanity. It's comfortable there. It's familiar. Everyone speaks the same language, shares the same assumptions, follows the same unspoken rules. But individual consciousness, that's where the magic happens. That's where you encounter your authentic self. And that's where the loneliness begins. Think of it like this. Imagine you're in a room full of people, all watching the same movie on their phones. They're all laughing at the same jokes, gasping at the same plot twists, completely absorbed in the shared experience. But you look up from your phone and see the room itself, the walls, the ceiling, the way the light falls through the windows. You see the bigger picture, and suddenly you can't go back to just watching the movie. You've seen too much. You know too much. And that knowledge separates you from everyone else in the room. This is what Jung meant when he talked about the burden of consciousness. The more conscious you become, the more alone you feel. But here's the thing, that loneliness isn't empty. It's full. It's rich. It's pregnant with possibility. Because in that solitude, you're not just alone with your thoughts. You're alone with your soul. And your soul has been waiting your entire life for this moment, the moment when you finally turn toward it instead of away from it. Let me ask you something else. Have you ever noticed how some people seem to drain your energy just by being around them? How after certain conversations you feel depleted, confused, or somehow less than you were before? Jung would say that's because they're operating from their persona. Their false self and your authentic self recognizes the dissonance. It's like trying to have a conversation with someone who's wearing a mask. You can hear the words, but you can't connect with the person underneath. But then there are other people, rare people, who seem to see straight through to your core. With them, you don't have to explain yourself. You don't have to perform. You can just be. And in those moments, the loneliness lifts. Not because you're no longer alone, but because you're finally in the presence of someone who recognizes your authentic self. These are what Jung called kindred spirits, people who have also done the work of individuation, who have also faced their shadow, who have also chosen authenticity over acceptance. The problem is these people are rare, really rare, because most people are terrified of their own authenticity. They've built their entire identity around being liked, being accepted, being normal. And authenticity threatens all of that. Authenticity says, I am who I am, regardless of whether you approve. And that's terrifying for someone whose entire sense of self depends on external validation. This is why Jung said that loneliness is often the price of psychological health. The healthier you become, the more you see through the illusions that keep most people connected to each other. You start to recognize manipulation, even when it's unconscious. You start to see the difference between genuine intimacy and emotional dependency. You start to understand that many of the connections you thought you had were actually just shared neuroses. And that's heartbreaking. It's like watching a beautiful painting and slowly realizing it's just a clever forgery. The beauty is still there, but the authenticity is gone. And once you've seen it, you can't unsee it. You can't go back to believing in the forgery, even if it would be more comfortable to do so. But here's what Jung discovered in his own journey through loneliness, and what he wants you to know about yours. That isolation you feel, it's not punishment. It's incubation. You're not being rejected by the world. You're being prepared for something bigger, something deeper, something more meaningful than the superficial connections you've been settling for. Think of it like a butterfly in a cocoon. From the outside, it looks like death. The caterpillar has disappeared, and all that's left is this dark, isolated pod. But inside, the most incredible transformation is taking place. The caterpillar isn't dying, it's becoming. And that process requires absolute solitude. It requires being cut off from the outside world so that the inner world can do its work. That's what your loneliness is. It's a cocoon. It's the space where your authentic self is being born. And just like the butterfly, you can't rush the process. You can't force your way out of the cocoon before the transformation is complete. You have to trust that the isolation is serving a purpose, even when it feels like it's killing you. Jung called this process individuation, the journey of becoming who you truly are. And it's not a comfortable process. It requires you to face parts of yourself you've been avoiding. It requires you to question everything you thought you knew about yourself and the world. It requires you to let go of the false connections that have been keeping you afloat and learn to swim in the depths of your own being. And that's terrifying. Because what if you dive deep and there's nothing there? What if you peel away all the layers and discover that underneath it all you're empty? What if the reason you feel so misunderstood is because there's nothing there to understand? But Jung discovered something beautiful in his own descent into the depths. He found that the deeper he went, the more he found. Not emptiness, but fullness. Not absence, but presence. Not nothing, but everything. He discovered what he called the self, the archetypal center of the psyche, the part of you that is connected to something larger than your individual existence. And when you touch that self, when you make contact with that deeper part of your being, the loneliness transforms. It doesn't disappear, it transforms. It becomes sacred solitude. It becomes the space where you commune with the divine within you. It becomes the source of your strength, not the evidence of your weakness. You know that feeling when you're alone in nature, maybe hiking in the mountains or sitting by the ocean, and you feel both completely isolated and completely connected at the same time? That's what Jung was talking about. That's the loneliness of individuation. You're alone with yourself, but you're also connected to something infinitely larger than yourself. This is why Jung believed that loneliness was often a sign of spiritual awakening. The soul knows when it's ready to make the journey inward, and it starts to withdraw from the external world to create space for that inner exploration. It's like a flower that closes its petals at night, not because it's dying, but because it's preparing for the next day's bloom. But here's the thing about this journey, it's not linear. You don't just go from connected to isolated to spiritually awakened. You go back and forth. You have moments of profound clarity, followed by periods of devastating loneliness. You have experiences of deep connection followed by feelings of complete alienation. And that's normal. That's how the psyche works. It's not a straight line. It's a spiral. And sometimes you have to go down to go up. Let me ask you something. Have you ever noticed how your loneliness feels different at different times? Sometimes it's sharp and painful, like a knife in your chest. Other times, it's dull and heavy, like a weight you carry everywhere. And sometimes rarely, but sometimes it's almost peaceful, like a quiet cathedral inside your soul. Jung would say that these different qualities of loneliness correspond to different stages of the individuation process. The sharp, painful loneliness is the ego's resistance to the process. It's the part of you that just wants to fit in, to be accepted, to have easy connections with others. The dull, heavy loneliness is the depression that often comes with seeing through illusions. It's the grief of losing your innocence, your naivety, your comfortable delusions. But that peaceful loneliness, that's something else entirely. That's the loneliness of the mystic, the artist, the visionary. That's the loneliness of someone who has found their center, their true self, their authentic being. It's not the loneliness of lack, it's the loneliness of fullness. It's not the loneliness of rejection, it's the loneliness of selection. You're not alone because no one wants you. You're alone because you're becoming someone worth being alone with. And that's the key insight Jung offers about loneliness. It's not about finding people who understand you, though that's wonderful when it happens. It's about becoming someone who understands themselves so deeply that external validation becomes unnecessary. It's about developing such a rich inner life that solitude becomes a gift rather than a curse. Think about the people you most admire, the artists, the writers, the spiritual teachers, the innovators. What do they all have in common? They've all spent significant time alone. They've all wrestled with their demons in solitude. They've all found a way to transform their loneliness into something beautiful, something meaningful, something that serves not just themselves, but the world. That's because loneliness, when approached with the right attitude, becomes a creative force. It becomes the space where new ideas are born, where authentic expression emerges, where the soul finds its voice. Jung himself did his most profound work during periods of intense isolation. His Red Book, his exploration of the unconscious, his entire theory of analytical psychology, all of it emerged from his willingness to sit alone with his own psyche and listen to what it had to say. But here's what you need to understand. This process isn't about becoming a hermit. It's not about rejecting human connection or deciding that people are all shallow and not worth your time. It's about developing such a strong sense of your own authentic self that you can engage with others from a place of fullness rather than emptiness, from a place of choice rather than need. When you're comfortable with your own company, when you've learned to find meaning and purpose in solitude, you stop looking for other people to complete you. You stop trying to find yourself in their approval. You stop needing them to understand you in order for you to understand yourself. And paradoxically, that's when real connection becomes possible. Because here's the thing about authentic connection, it can only happen between two people who are comfortable with themselves. If you're looking for someone else to fill the void inside you, you're not really connecting with them. You're using them. You're projecting onto them. You're asking them to be something they can't be and shouldn't have to be. But when you've done the work of individuation, when you've learned to be alone without being lonely, when you've developed a relationship with your own soul, that's when you can offer genuine connection to another person. That's when you can see them as they really are, not as you need them to be. That's when you can love them for who they are, not for what they can do for you. You know that feeling when you meet someone and you instantly feel like you've known them forever? Jung would say, that's not just chemistry, that's recognition. It's two individuated souls recognizing each other. It's two people who have done the work of becoming whole and who can therefore create a connection that's based on authenticity rather than need. These connections are rare, but they're profound. They're the difference between a shallow pond and a deep well. They're the difference between being understood and being seen. They're the difference between being accepted and being celebrated. And they're only possible when you've learned to celebrate yourself, even in your solitude. This is why Jung said that loneliness is often the beginning of wisdom. Because when you're forced to confront yourself without the distraction of other people's opinions, when you have to sit with your own thoughts and feelings without anyone else to blame or praise, you start to see yourself clearly. You start to understand your patterns, your motivations, your fears, your desires. You start to recognize the voice of your authentic self beneath all the noise of your conditioning. And that recognition is the beginning of freedom. Because once you know who you really are, you can't be manipulated by people who want you to be someone else. Once you're comfortable with your own company, you can't be controlled by the fear of being alone. Once you've found your center, you can't be knocked off balance by other people's approval or disapproval. Let me ask you something. What if your loneliness isn't a problem to be solved, but a gift to be received? What if the reason you feel misunderstood isn't because you're broken, but because you're whole? What if the isolation you experience isn't evidence of your unworthiness, but evidence of your readiness to become who you truly are? Jung believed that the goal of human life isn't to be happy, it's to be whole. And wholeness often requires a period of separation, a time of withdrawal from the collective in order to discover your individual truth. It's like a seed that has to be buried in darkness before it can grow toward the light. The darkness isn't the enemy, it's the necessary condition for growth. Your loneliness is that darkness. It's the fertile soil where your authentic self is taking root. And just like a seed, you can't rush the process. You can't force yourself to grow faster by trying harder or by finding the right person to understand you. You have to trust that the process is working, even when you can't see the results yet. But here's what Jung wants you to know. You're not alone in your loneliness. Throughout history, every person who has ever made a significant contribution to human understanding has walked this path. Every artist, every mystic, every philosopher, every innovator has had to face the terror and the beauty of their own solitude. They've all had to learn to find meaning in their isolation and to transform their loneliness into something larger than themselves. And that's what you're doing too, whether you realize it or not. Your loneliness isn't just personal, it's archetypal. It's part of the hero's journey, the classic pattern of human development that Jung identified in myths and stories throughout history. The hero always has to leave the familiar world, face challenges alone, and return with wisdom that can benefit the community. That's exactly what you're doing. You're leaving the familiar world of superficial connections and easy answers. You're facing the challenge of discovering who you really are beneath all the masks and expectations. And eventually, you'll return with wisdom not just for yourself, but for everyone whose life you touch. Think about it this way. Every time you choose authenticity over approval, you're giving permission to others to do the same. Every time you speak your truth, even when it's uncomfortable, you're showing others that it's possible to be real. Every time you embrace your loneliness instead of running from it, you're demonstrating that solitude can be sacred. This is why Jung said that individuation isn't just a personal process, it's a service to humanity. Because the more people who are willing to become whole, the more whole our collective becomes. The more people who are willing to face their shadow, the less shadow gets projected onto others. The more people who are willing to be authentic, the safer it becomes for everyone to be authentic. Your loneliness isn't selfish, it's generous. It's your gift to the world. Because when you emerge from this cocoon of solitude, you won't just be more comfortable with yourself. You'll be more capable of real intimacy, more able to offer genuine support, more skilled at seeing others clearly, You'll be a lighthouse in a world full of people who are lost at sea. But you have to trust the process. You have to believe that your loneliness is leading somewhere, even when you can't see the destination. You have to have faith that your isolation is preparing you for connection, even when connection seems impossible. You have to remember that every great tree has to have deep roots, and deep roots grow in darkness. Jung spent years in his own dark night of the soul, wrestling with visions and voices and experiences that he couldn't explain to anyone else. His friends thought he was losing his mind. His colleagues questioned his sanity, but he trusted the process. He trusted that his psyche was trying to tell him something important, even if he couldn't understand it yet. And out of that darkness came some of the most profound insights into human nature that the world has ever seen. Out of that loneliness came an understanding of the psyche that has helped millions of people make sense of their own inner worlds. Out of that isolation came a body of work that continues to illuminate the path for anyone who has the courage to journey into their own depths. That's what your loneliness is preparing you for. Maybe not a career in psychology, but something equally important, a deep understanding of yourself and your place in the world. A capacity for authentic connection that transcends the superficial. A wisdom that can only come from having walked through the valley of solitude and emerged on the other side. You know that feeling when you're having a conversation with someone and you suddenly realize that you're not really talking to them, you're talking to your idea of them. You're responding to your projection of who you think they are, not who they actually are. That's what happens when you haven't done the work of individuation. You're so disconnected from your own authentic self that you can't really see anyone else's authentic self either. But when you spent time alone, when you've learned to strip away the masks and the projections and the expectations, when you've learned to sit with yourself without judgment or agenda, that's when you develop the capacity for real seeing. That's when you can look at another person and see not just their persona, but their soul. That's when real connection becomes possible. And that kind of connection is worth waiting for. It's worth the loneliness, worth the isolation, worth the years of feeling misunderstood. Because when it happens, when you find someone who sees you as clearly as you see yourself, when you can be completely authentic without fear of judgment, when you can share your deepest thoughts and feelings and be met with understanding rather than confusion, it's like coming home to yourself in the presence of another. These connections are rare because they require two people who have both done the work. They require two people who have both faced their shadow, both embraced their authenticity, both learned to be comfortable with their own company. They require two people who are connecting from wholeness rather than from need. But here's the beautiful thing. Once you've developed this capacity for authentic connection, you start to attract people who have the same capacity. Like attracts like. Authenticity attracts authenticity. Wholeness attracts wholeness. The loneliness that once felt like punishment starts to feel like protection from the kind of superficial connections that would drain your energy and dilute your truth. Jung called this the process of attracting your true community, not the people who want you to be someone else, but the people who celebrate who you really are, not the people who need you to be strong or weak or funny or serious, but the people who can hold space for all of your complexity, not the people who want to fix you or change you or improve you, but the people who recognize that you're already whole. already complete, already exactly who you need to be. This is why Jung said that loneliness is often the prelude to the most meaningful connections of your life. Because when you stop looking for someone to complete you, you start attracting people who complement you. When you stop needing to be understood, you start attracting people who understand you naturally. When you stop trying to fit in, you start finding your tribe. But you have to be patient. You have to trust that the process is working even when you can't see the results. You have to believe that your loneliness is preparing you for something beautiful, even when it feels like it's destroying you. You have to remember that every winter is followed by spring, even when the cold seems endless. Let me ask you something. What if the reason you feel so misunderstood isn't because you're speaking a different language, but because you're speaking the truth? What if the reason people seem to avoid you or feel uncomfortable around you isn't because you're doing something wrong, but because you're doing something right? What if your loneliness isn't evidence of your brokenness, but evidence of your wholeness? Jung believed that in a sick society, the healthy person will always feel like an outsider. In a world that rewards conformity, the individual will always feel alone. In a culture that values appearance over authenticity, the genuine person will always feel misunderstood. But that doesn't mean there's anything wrong with you. It means there's something right with you. Your loneliness is not a bug, it's a feature. It's not a flaw in your programming, it's proof that your programming is working correctly. It's not evidence that you're broken, it's evidence that you're becoming whole. And wholeness, Jung discovered, is always initially isolating, because most people are living in fragments, and when you show up as an integrated being, you disrupt their comfortable illusions. This is why Jung said that the path of individuation is the path of the hero, not because it's easy, but because it's necessary. Someone has to be willing to leave the comfortable world of collective consciousness and venture into the unknown territory of individual authenticity. Someone has to be willing to face the dragons of their own shadow and emerge with treasure that can benefit the whole community. That someone is you. Your loneliness is your call to adventure. Your isolation is your quest. Your journey into the depths of your own being is your heroic mission. And like all heroes, you're not undertaking this journey for yourself alone. You're undertaking it for everyone who will be inspired by your courage, everyone who will be healed by your authenticity, everyone who will be liberated by your example. Because here's the thing about authentic people, they give others permission to be authentic too. When you show up as your real self, you create space for others to do the same. When you speak your truth, you make it safer for others to speak theirs. When you embrace your loneliness instead of running from it, you show others that solitude can be sacred. Your journey into authenticity isn't just personal, it's political. It's revolutionary. It's an act of rebellion against a culture that wants you to be a consumer, not a creator. It's a refusal to participate in the collective delusion that happiness comes from external validation. It's a declaration that you are enough, exactly as you are, without anyone else's permission or approval. And that's terrifying for a world that profits from your insecurity. That's threatening to a system that depends on your need for external validation. That's dangerous to a culture that wants you to believe that you're broken and that they have the products or services or relationships that will fix you. But you're not broken. You never were. You're just waking up. And waking up is always initially disorienting. It's like stepping out of a dark room into bright sunlight. Everything looks different, and it takes time for your eyes to adjust. But once they do, you can see clearly for the first time in your life. That's what your loneliness is. It's your eyes adjusting to the light of your own consciousness. It's your soul learning to see itself clearly without the distortion of other people's projections. It's your authentic self emerging from the cocoon of conditioning and discovering its wings. And when you finally spread those wings, when you finally learn to fly in the vast sky of your own being, you'll realize that you were never alone. You were just learning to be alone with yourself. And that's the most important relationship you'll ever have, not because other relationships don't matter, but because this one makes all the others possible. Jung discovered that the person who can be truly alone is the person who can be truly intimate. The person who doesn't need others to feel complete is the person who can offer completeness to others. The person who has learned to love themselves is the person who can love others without condition or agenda. Your loneliness is teaching you how to love, not the desperate, needy love that seeks to fill a void, but the generous, abundant love that overflows from fullness, not the love that depends on being loved back, but the love that exists for its own sake, not the love that needs to be understood to be valid, but the love that understands itself so deeply that external validation becomes irrelevant. This is the love that Jung called agape, the love that flows from the self, the archetypal center of being. It's not personal love, though it can include personal love. It's not romantic love, though it can enhance romantic love. It's not even human love, though it expresses itself through human relationships. It's the love that exists at the core of being itself, the love that you are, not the love that you seek. And when you touch that love, when you make contact with that source, your loneliness transforms completely. It doesn't disappear, it becomes sacred. It becomes the space where you commune with the divine within yourself. It becomes the cathedral where you worship at the altar of your own authentic being. This is why Jung said that loneliness is often the doorway to the numinous, the mysterious, transcendent dimension of existence that gives life its deepest meaning. When you're alone with yourself, really alone, you start to sense that you're not just an isolated individual struggling through life. You start to sense that you're part of something larger, something magnificent, something that connects you to every other being who has ever lived or will live. You start to understand that your loneliness isn't isolation, it's intimacy. Intimacy with yourself, with your soul, with the mystery of existence itself. You start to realize that you're not alone in your loneliness. You're joined by every poet, every mystic, every artist, every visionary who has ever walked this path before you. You're part of an invisible community of souls who have chosen depth over surface, authenticity over approval, truth over comfort. You're part of a lineage of individuals who have been willing to face their own darkness in order to find their light. You're part of a tradition of heroes who have been willing to journey into the underworld of their own psyche in order to bring back wisdom for the world. And that's not loneliness, that's belonging. That's not isolation, that's connection. That's not emptiness, that's fullness. You belong to the community of the authentic. You're connected to the network of the genuine. You're full of the presence of your own soul. Jung believed that this is the real purpose of human life, not to be understood by others, but to understand yourself. Not to be loved by others, but to love yourself. Not to be completed by others, but to become complete within yourself. And when you achieve that completeness, when you become whole, you don't need others to validate your existence. You become a validation of existence itself. This is why the most profound spiritual teachers throughout history have all been in some sense loners, not because they rejected human connection, but because they found something so beautiful in solitude that they didn't need connection to feel complete. They found something so meaningful in their own being that they didn't need others to give their life meaning, and paradoxically, that's what made them so magnetic to others. That's what made people want to be around them, to learn from them, to be inspired by them, because they offered something that's incredibly rare in this world, the presence of someone who is completely comfortable with themselves. You know that feeling when you're around someone who is genuinely at peace with themselves? How their calmness seems to calm you, how their groundedness seems to ground you, how their authenticity seems to give you permission to be authentic too. That's what happens when someone has transformed their loneliness into sacred solitude. They become a source of peace for others because they've found peace within themselves. That's what your loneliness is preparing you for. Not a life of isolation, but a life of such deep inner connection that you can offer genuine outer connection. Not a life of being misunderstood, but a life of understanding yourself so deeply that you can help others understand themselves. Not a life of emptiness, but a life of such fullness that you become a source of fullness for others. But you have to trust the process. You have to believe that your loneliness is leading somewhere beautiful, even when you can't see the destination. You have to have faith that your isolation is preparing you for connection, even when connection seems impossible. You have to remember that every seed has to spend time in darkness before it can grow toward the light. Your loneliness is that darkness. It's the fertile soil where your authentic self is taking root. It's the cocoon where your transformation is taking place. It's the sacred space where your soul is learning to recognize itself. And when you emerge from this process, and you will emerge, you won't just be more comfortable with yourself. You'll be a gift to the world. Because the world needs people who have done the work of individuation. The world needs people who have faced their shadow and integrated their light. The world needs people who have learned to be authentic in a culture of pretense, who have learned to be whole in a world of fragments, who have learned to be alone without being lonely. The world needs you exactly as you are, in all your glorious individuality. Not the version of you that tries to fit in, but the version of you that stands out. Not the version of you that seeks approval, but the version of you that offers authenticity. Not the version of you that needs to be understood, but the version of you that understands. You've always been the one you've been waiting for. Now, finally, you see it. Your loneliness hasn't been punishment. It's been preparation. Your isolation hasn't been rejection. It's been selection. Your journey into the depths of your own being hasn't been a descent into darkness. It's been a descent into light, the light that you are, the light that you've always been, the light that no amount of loneliness can extinguish, because it's not dependent on anyone else's recognition or approval. It's the light of your own authentic being, shining in the darkness of a world that has forgotten how to see. And now you're ready to let it shine.